So let's see if this works. Amazing. I was talking to Chris the other day, and we were talking about how the startup community has progressed over the last few years in our thinking, and how a few years ago what seemed really new is now pretty commonplace. Things like lean startup, when we started Lean Camp in 2010, nobody really had picked up on this. And so we were talking about what's next. How are we going to progress from here? One of the things that I really found useful in the world of lean startup was work by John Mullins. He wrote a book called The New Business Road Test. And so this talk is based on that. So it's based on actually quite older work, but where we can go from there with it. Most of us are familiar with this, the build, measure, learn loop from lean startup. We've gotten pretty fast at going through this loop now. After a few years, we're getting pretty good at it. In terms of build, we have so many new technical platforms that allow us to deploy product, to deploy tests very quickly. In terms of measurement, we have a huge arsenal of tools, and we can learn and measure very quickly. But the learning part, actually, that's still pretty slow. The decision-making is slow. The course correction is slow. We need information. One of the places I've been watching is a group of people who did a study on how successful entrepreneurs make decisions. They call it effectuation. And one of the principles, the constant principles that came up, was how successful entrepreneurs look at risk. When we normally look at risk, especially if we're thinking like a big company, we go, well, what's the upside here? This is going to be huge. It's going to be massive. Okay, what could go wrong? Let's take those risks and let's analyze them. And then we get this attitude in lean startup where it's effectively large business thinking, right? Take a look at the upside, take a look at the risks. In large businesses, you have to do a plan, and you have to commit politically to that plan. In the startup world, we run tests, but we still think about it in terms of these big risks that we need to assess in order to get to this huge pot of gold at the end. But successful entrepreneurs don't think about it this way. They think about it the other way. And you might notice this in your thinking. In terms of risk, you know there's upside. You don't know how much. We don't need to quantify it. When we get there, we'll see how big it is, and we'll adapt, sure. And there will be things that are hard along the way. We'll also adapt as we get to those. The way successful entrepreneurs think about risk, then, is what can I afford to lose? What can I put on the table that if it doesn't go my way, I can still live to fight another battle? That's the affordable loss principle. Now take that and apply that to the information we need to make decisions, the information we need to make actionable course corrections so we know we are adapting our business and actually moving closer to where we need to be. What can we put on the table to get some information that will help us? But even if we don't get that information, we haven't lost the farm. We can still live to fight another battle. So for the remainder of this talk, I'm going to cover it from two angles. What information do we need, and how do we get it? A lot of the startup rhetoric is around this. So, X out of 10 startups fail, 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Where does this number come from? Does anybody know? We all believe it. Sorry? 9? Okay, we can guess, yeah, but how do we know it's 9? Is there any evidence that this is true?
I have failures.
You've done 9 out of 10 failures. So have I. Oh. So when you look at where these numbers come from, it actually comes from a body of work that existed 10 years ago. And has anybody heard of the book Getting to Plan B? No, okay. So it was written by a guy called John Mullins. Oh yeah, a few of you over here. The book he wrote after that is called The New Business Road Test, and in it, he's the guy who actually did the research on how many startups fail and why. And what he came up with is, yes, so many startups fail, the large majority fail. The rhetoric in the startup world is because you built something that nobody wanted, or because you didn't get the team right. But he actually looked at that, and he came up with this model, the 7 domains framework. So these are 7 areas that you can look at that are common causes for startup failure that can be avoided. I'll go through them. So actually, let me back up. So in large categories, there's looking at the market at a macro and micro level. So like bottom up and top down, and same on the industry side. And then there's everything to do with the team. So we'll go through it. So the ground level market, do they care? Do the customers want this? Are they taking action now? Right? Is there any evidence that they are going to buy? This is really where lean startup lives and shines. And you can look at things like compensating behavior. You can go talk to customers about what they do now. The book, The Mom Test, is all about having conversations that flush up this information. But basically what we're looking at is existing behavior. Through existing behavior, we can make a decision based on just the information that we get from existing behavior to learn whether or not this aspect of our business, the micro aspect of the market, is going to work or not. But then we can go top down. Is this big enough to be worth it? There are tons of startups that get caught in this problem where we think that there's this big upside, and we end up working for years on a startup that just isn't going to ever be what we want it to be. It's never going to be big enough. And really, we should drop it at that point. But we don't, because we have sunken costs. We're already there, right? But we can find that out sooner. I had a startup setting up business centers in hotels. I figured out a way to do really well to start to eat like big chunks of the market and start to be a dominant player in the region. The problem is business centers in hotels don't exist anymore, really, right? Like we did very well competitively, but the business itself was, even though it was a dominant player, was still not doing well financially. We had to move into different products very quickly. The market wasn't big enough. We should have spotted that sooner. So the decision hack here is that there's cheap information. It's really, like, I hate startup hype. It just gets us into such tunnel vision, and it's so cool right now to just, go talk to your customers, go run an MVP and measure. You can Google for like basic information about the growth of markets. That takes half an hour. It's cheap information, and it really helps you course correct. From the industry side, so this is who we're competing against. One thing that's really important is to know our way around the industry we're going to fight battles in. If we don't know the territory, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So do we know our way around? Nestoria is a great example of this. They are basically a property search company, website. They did a great job of positioning themselves within the industry. What they looked at was they realized that you've got all these estate agents. So you've got people buying and selling or renting property. You've got the estate agents on top of that. Then you've got sort of larger agencies. Then you've got aggregators. And they went, okay, that's the stack of the industry. Where are we going to be? And they decided to create a new level on the stack just for them. The only way to get a property onto Nestoria is to get it into one of the other aggregators. Their only customers are the major aggregators in the UK. One of their rules of thumb was don't compete with your customer. So that's what they did. They're very good at the search. And basically when you click on any of these things, you go straight into an aggregator site, and they make money off that. So knowing your industry is really important. This gets them a defensible place in the market where they can just grow, and they don't need to worry about their customers or competitors really pushing on them too hard. I learned about this from one of my students. He taught me this trick at UCL. He got an industry report from one of the services that students get for free at UCL. And he went to a few industry meetups, and he just started name dropping that he had read this report, knowing that a lot of these guys couldn't afford them. You know, these are like these big analyst reports that cost £3,000 each. And he used this to get meetings. Now he's a guy in the know, and he would then set up a meeting. At that point, he would trade that information. So he would ask them questions, and he would trade the information that he had in the report. After he talked to one person, now he had the information in the report, and he had inside knowledge from the meeting he just had. He'd go to the third meeting, and he would constantly trade information. This way, he built up a map of the industry with knowledge that allowed him to position his his competitor, he was actually moving into Brazil, so it allowed him to learn a lot to get into Brazil quite easily. This question is often forgotten by startups. How will you make money? How will you grow? There's a few ways that we can cut into this. Generally, when you look at startups and the way we think and working with founder-centric, working with so many accelerators, you see this constantly. We are like kids in a sandbox. Every time we see a good idea, we want it. And there's another good idea, and we want it. And before we know it, we're just surrounded by all of this crap that we're not using, and it's getting in the way. Good ideas combined often become bad ideas, and we see it this way. This is the Look business model. This is a seed camp company a few years ago. That's them demonstrating their pride in their complexity of their business model, which is what ended up killing them, because it was too complex to adapt quickly. So one hack here is just to know your options, just to explore your options, to prime your mind for other possibilities, so that when you're out there, you don't have tunnel vision of this is my idea and I just want to find evidence that proves or disproves that. You want to know all of your ideas, so when you're out there getting evidence, any evidence that backs up any possible idea is acknowledged and is acted on. We see this with the business model canvas all the time. People pick one idea for their business model and they try and validate that one idea. It's very, very slow. There are a range of options, and knowing the option space is very, very valuable. Even when you validate that idea, it might give you a signal towards a multi-sided market, or it might give you a signal towards some kind of viral coefficient. The other thing is to know the bounds. So we're talking about a lot of sort of unsexy kind of approaches to entrepreneurship here. One is using Excel, right? We're told don't do financial projections because you're just making up the numbers. Well, that's true about the numbers that go in, but the formulas themselves, the dynamics and the relationships between the numbers are still valid. They're still important. And when you create models, you can find minimum and maximum bounds. A lot of people ask about MVPs saying, well, how do you choose what your criteria is, your failure criteria is for an experiment? Because isn't it arbitrary? Not if you know your bounds. Not if you know each number and exactly what it needs to be, because if it's below that number, there's no business. That's how you set your criteria for an experiment. So running these models around what makes money and how you grow, very simple formulas, allows you to avoid this problem. This is Invisible Hand. This is a project that came out of Forward Labs in London. Basically, it's a excuse me. It's a Chrome plugin that whenever you're looking at a product online, it will automatically search and find a better deal and just pop in and go, oh, I found a better deal over here. It works on razor thin commissions, and it needs millions and millions of people. The way Forward decided they were going to double down on this idea was they worked out the basic growth formula. They worked out the basic how we're going to make money formula. And they got all of those numbers to 20% in their early experiments. 20% of where they needed to be. And their thinking was, the rule of thumb, was that you could multiply this by 5. Once you get everything together, you can get a 5 times multiple through optimization. But if one of them is below 20% of where it needs to be from the early test, it'll probably take the whole thing down. So that's how they try multiple ideas. This is now, you can see in their numbers, they're into millions of users. I think, if I were to take a guess of why most startups fail today, from all the work I see in accelerators, I think it's team problems. I think we're pretty good at the other stuff, and team is the thing we ignore. It's pretty common where we see teams that just are missing a core skill. Entrepreneurship thought leaders without tech skills build tech companies, and nobody likes to build software in the founding team. How good do you think the software is? So one of the things we can do, and this also comes from effectuation, is recognize that successful entrepreneurs actually maintain multiple goals. Depending on what you do and what you achieve and what you acquire, you can then change your goals. That's okay. VCs don't like you to do this because at some point, once they've invested in you, you've got to agree to a plan and you've got to agree to a path. But in a lot of different contexts, it's perfectly viable to change course. If you're going to a meetup to do sales because you want to make a few connections with customers, and Richard Branson shows up to that meetup, you can change your goal. No one's going to blame you. Another problem that we see quite commonly are the connections. Right? So does the team have the necessary connections to make this business work? We have to move fast. We have to grow fast. We have to be able to make phone calls and get answers. And if we can't, we're just hamstringing ourselves. But we can't always. That's a luxury often, right? So it's great when you know a co-founder who is heavily networked in the industry or the market you want to operate in, but we can't always do that. So one way to get around this is to plant a flag, right? Is to get out there and say, I am here and I am in this space. I'm new. Please come talk to me. I did this recently. I know nothing about the developing world. I've had a few trips. I've seen a few poor villages. But basically, I'm a developing world middle-class guy with very little empathy. But I want to help. My very first post on Medium, where I'm unknown, was this. I basically just said, hey, I really think there's an opportunity here. I do a lot of work with startups in tech, with accelerators, so I have some credibility here. But I know nothing about the developing world. I see this potential. Can you please talk to me? So it was a big sort of rhetorical read, and at the end it just said, please get in touch. I wrote that, I think, 2-3 months ago. I am still getting inquiries from like top programs all over the world. In Syria, in the Philippines, across Africa, and the Caribbean. My network in the developing world, for tech in the developing world now, is good enough. It's pretty good, just from planting a flag. I chose Medium because I knew that I could push and try and spread the word on Medium. Second thing is often we just don't have enough empathy. We don't have enough of an understanding. We're asking questions and we're trying to answer all these tiny little questions when really what we need to do is go there and see. So the first thing I did after I got all these emails in was I said, look, I'd love to talk to you, but it seems that I really need to go there. So I was invited to Ghana to go see one of the top programs in Africa. So I booked that flight and that fell through because of visas, so that'll be delayed. The other thing is interesting in Sofia is some people say, you should check out the Roma people. Okay, sure. So last week I was in Faculteta teaching tech startups to Roma business people. It was amazing. And the most interesting thing there was even the people who said you should check it out, they had no idea what goes on there. People say, don't take your laptop. Don't take a car with mirrors. Absolutely no idea. I met an SAP programmer, a guy who already knows HTML. All these business people are amazing. And they were teaching me stuff. Jordan and I are going there on Monday to teach them HTML5 mobile apps. If you want to join, we need your help. But we're going there to try, to see, to observe, to gain that empathy so that questions don't come up. We already know the answers. So I have seen probably on average every second accelerator cohort we've worked with, and we've worked now with, I think, 40 or 50 cohorts in the last year. At least in half of them, one team ends up fighting so bad that they either just go home or they just, it just gets in the way of their progress. Alignment is huge. Does anybody know any of these two guys? Recognize them? Have you heard of a startup called Buffer? So Buffer is like this lean startup case study. It was sort of the quintessential landing page test. They're killing it. They went to AngelPad. They took down money, but they couldn't spend it because they're making so much revenue from their customers. It's basically a Twitter service. So I met Joel and Oo, his business partner, in his previous startup a couple years ago. And they were struggling with this thing called OnePage. They had 5,000 registered users. They were growing like a bit upwards. And OO really, really wanted to fight for it. Joel really, really wanted to test stuff. And between them, they just couldn't agree on the right test to run to begin with. Eventually, Joel walked and then started Buffer. So I've started doing this with my business partners. Mapping the overlap between our goals. Again, we can have multiple goals, that's all right. We all see different potential future end cases for the businesses we're going for. We all see different things that we need to happen, otherwise we don't think it's worth our time investment anymore down that path. What I do is I map them all out. So we all sit there, and one per card, we just write them out quietly for 5 minutes. Then we put them down on the table, and we match them. And the things that are matched, we know there's alignment there. And the things that are isolated, we know that that's just not, my business partners aren't interested in that angle, in that direction. But just putting that on the table, literally in front of us, gives us all insight and empathy with each other and what we're all trying to achieve together. So I'll leave you with this. This is one observation that I've had, is that first-time entrepreneurs, they really care about ideas and process. We seek comfort in a process that says, oh, if we just do step 1, 2, 3, and 4, we'll know we're on the right track. And we don't want to share our ideas. It's all about the ideas and the process. But when you see experienced founders, it's really all about opportunity costs. And we know there's no process. Just like, is this working? Is this not working? I've seen a lot of great entrepreneurs walk away from perfectly viable businesses because their partners aren't aligned. I've seen them walk away from great potential because there's just simply no way to get that early traction. It's just too hard, and there are better things to go do. A few things to pick up on. So the new business road test is where the 7 domains framework comes from. It's quite a good read. The mom test, where Rob fits, is the quintessential book on how to have customer conversations so that information, actionable information, flushes up quickly. And I'm plugging my new book, Decision Hacks. It's not written yet, but I'm working on it. Again, we are sharing loads of our stuff and lessons learned on a mailing list, so please sign up. Decision Hacks will be on there as this content progresses. It will be there. And yeah, please do not get tunnel vision. Please step back and look at all the different ways that could bite you. A year from now, 2 years from now, step back, address them now. Have those hard conversations with your customers. Take an evening out and do that research on Google about trends in your industry. Go out there and plant flags and get the connection so you can have the empathy you need to make proper decisions. And hopefully I'll see you on the other side. Thanks. I don't think Chris was ready for me to end early, because coffee is ready.